Hello and welcome back to the Peer-to-Peer Podcast. Got a brilliant panel joined myself today and we're talking about burnout and balance in the self-employed estate agency world. So Celeste, I'll come to yourself first of all. So you've been in the property industry for about 25 years now, both as an employed agent and a self-employed agent as well. How do you navigate that transition between being an employed estate agent through to being self-employed? How does that look?
Oh gosh, so being employed. So when I was first started out my career and I was employed, I always had an ambition, if you like, that I was going to have my own business at some point. I think going into business is very different from being employed, and I'll try to start where to go with this. But yeah, so basically going from employment, when I first started up my own business, I started up on the high street and I opened up an office. And I sat in the back of that office one day and I looked at the front of the office and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got a CRM system here with no applicants on it. I've got a window with no properties in the window. What am I going to do? I could do estate agency standing on my head. So I'd done estate agency for 12 years prior to setting up my own business. But when you set up a business, there's so much more involved. You've got to wear so many more hats. You've got to suddenly become marketer, you've got to be accountant, you've got to be HR, you've got to be valuer, branch manager, etc., negotiator. You're suddenly wearing all these different hats. And I suppose over sort of my career, if you like, I did several years, had multiple estate agency offices, went into partnership along the way. And it came with a lot of stress. And you think it's going to be easier because you're going in for this work-life balance thing that everybody talks about, but actually it is a lot more stressful. So when the brokerage side of things came in to the UK, I saw that as being able to do what I was doing as a business owner, but suddenly being able to bring it into a brokerage scenario, for example, and having some of those hats taken away from me. So yes, there's a lot to obviously take into account when you're going from being an employee to a self-employed or business owner. But I think nowadays, when I first opened my businesses, that was back in 2010, we've evolved a lot further forward now with the brokerage models sort of in play, that I think that there's a lot more support for people going into self-employed.
Dan, so you've got a roaring business, and I'm sure if you wanted to, you could work 24/7 with the amount of properties you're listing and selling. How do you draw the line between sort of work and play, and draw the line between this is kind of work Dan and this is kind of family Dan?
I don't draw it. The wife draws it. I am a bit of a nightmare. You know, I'm obsessed with work. I love what I do. I love the brand that I work with. I love the team that I work with. And I do find it hard to say no. So the balance is something I've had to force myself to try and bring into play, because burnout is a big thing. And you do get to a point, certainly towards the end of last year, 3.5 years in. So I was about 18 months, 2 years into owning my own business. And you have to work hard, you know, ultimately, you've got to put in the graft, to see any kind of reward. It doesn't come easy. So that first, year, 18 months was constant. But, in my perception of being self-employed, when I first started, I had all of these wonderful thoughts. I could play golf more. I could pick the kids up from school. I could, go out for lunches with a wife. I can, do, nice things, which I do now. But, at the beginning, it was difficult to balance. But as your business grows and, obviously the more success you have, it does free you up to give you a little bit more time, to draw the line. If I'm honest with you, the kind of service I offer my clients, the availability, I'm readily available for them kind of 24/7, but I don't make no exception for that or excuse for it. Often on holiday, I'll be in the room for a couple of hours a day working. And we just did a section on fees. That's why I'm not, a cheap agent. You get what you pay for, but you do get me and I on 24/7, 365 days a year. I drew the line when I did a viewing on Christmas Day.
That was good of you.
It's a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
2 years ago. Well, nearly 2 years ago now. Which did end up in an offer. So, but at that point it was, okay, Christmas Day is the day that I'll have off.
But do you think that's come from when you built your business over the first couple of years or so, you're so kind of head down, focused, plow forward sort of thing? Do you find that you've maybe got a gear change there to kind of put your head up and go, actually, we're doing all right now? I don't need to grind out 6 days a week for 14 hours a day. And when I was going to start that with in the first, 6 months of a year, for example, you take your foot off your gas, you kind of go backwards really quickly.
Absolutely.
Whereas now you've got kind of momentum in the business. Do you find that you're at the stage now where potentially you could start to scale that back and maybe it wouldn't have the same effect on the business?
I think you have to. I think you have to be really disciplined with it, because I think you can just, I'll just keep going, because, I've always lived in fear that one day it's all going to be taken away from me. I've worked so hard for, a few years now. I don't want to lose it. And if I take my foot off the gas, it's all just going to disappear and disintegrate. I'll see other people, doing things on social media if I'm not working that particular day. And then I'll be thinking like, that should be me. I should be doing that. I should be back in the office. I should be, prospecting. I should be knocking on some more doors today. I should be, in actual fact, I've got, a lot to be getting on with and, a decent business behind me. So I do struggle. Like, I can't lie, I do struggle with that balancing act, but I've got better. Yeah. But yeah, there is definitely, a time now where actually I can take a little bit more time away and enjoy the rewards, because you have to. You have to kind of think, why am I doing this? And, it's not fair on the kids and stuff, to not be there and present in their lives. That's one of the reasons I've done this.
I think when you're doing it yourself as well, it's very much that you care. It's your business. You don't want to let anything slip. You don't want to drop those plates. So you're constantly got your eye on everything.
That's exactly the right word. You care. You care a lot. Yeah.
Adam, how about yourself? How do you find drawing the line?
Quite easy. Yeah, I mean, the main reason I got into self-employment and brokerages was in my employed life, I was almost hitting burnout. I remember one holiday, my boss, all my colleagues knew I was away with my wife. My phone was still going constant and I was really on edge. I was getting really stressed out. So now I really cherish the moments that I can pick and choose what I do in the day. Even when I started, I made a conscious effort to get out, get active. I've been on bike rides and I've taken offers while cycling, believe it or not, which have been agreed. And my clients, I don't hide. I tell them when I go out to them, this is me, this is what I do. I might be out and about. There might be kids in the background, but I will answer your call. I will respond to you ASAP. They know I'm a human being and it all seems to work really well. So.
Do you find your clients connect with you maybe a bit better because they have that understanding that you are just a guy?
100%. For me, it's not the same sort of relationship. When you're self-employed, it's a very different lens and it's a much more meaningful relationship. I've had a couple of examples where once we've sold the property, you get to exchange and I call them, say, congratulations, we made it. And they turn around and say, no, Adam, congratulate you. I know how hard you've worked for it and how much it meant to you. So yeah, it's a completely different relationship.
And how do you guys find the isolation? I think isolation is the right word in the estate agency world because it can be lonely when you're out and about doing viewings and appointments sort of thing. How do you deal with that in your day-to-day to make sure that's minimised as much as possible?
I'd like to answer this one. So one of the reasons why I ended up joining TAUK and going into the brokerage style was because I was running my own high street estate agency since 2010. And I got to a point where I thought, do you know what, it is quite lonely. You've just got you to rely on. We all have our mentors and people that we can sort of turn to, maybe whether it's family or a friend or whatever, but it is a really, really lonely business when you're out on your own. So being part of an organisation, a business where you've got like-minded people all suddenly working around you and you can pick up the phone and you can talk to somebody and you've got mentors around you that will pick you up. We all have bad days, right, occasionally. That is worth some weight in gold. And I was facing burnout when I was running my business, and I was getting to the point where I actually had to strip it all back and say to myself, why did you get into this in the first place? What was the main things that were important to you? Because it's really, really easy just to get sucked into that world. And like you say, you just keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and you're on this treadmill where you just want to make it work and you just keep going with it. But actually what's happening is you're mentally draining yourself and you're burning yourself out. So I had to sort of sit down and take it right back to basics and go, why did I get into this? I got into this because I wanted to have flexibility around my family. I got into this obviously for the financial rewards. am I getting those two things out of it? Yes, I am, but I'm getting all of these other added pressures behind it all. So how can I take some of those things away from me? And then that's when I started looking at, obviously, the self-employed models and the difference when you're coming into the self-employed model from being a sort of a high street business, if you like. You're suddenly going into an organization where you're having a lot of those stress levels and things taken away from you, because you've suddenly got that team that are taking your calls for you. You've got support. You've got people you can talk to. You know, the amount of agents that I've called up within TAUK and gone and met or whatever, just to sit down and have a chat and say, how are you doing this? What are you doing? You know, it's worth its weight in gold.
So let's explore more about the sort of community side at TAUK. So how important, Dan, is that to yourself to be able to pick up the phone to Nelly, for example, or to Celeste or anyone on the team and say, either I had a great day, this has gone really well, how cool's this? Or I've just had a valuation where they said X, Y, and Z and it's gone terribly, sort of thing.
I think it's invaluable. It's literally, that's the best word I can use. It's invaluable. You know, everyone's like-minded, all business owners, all come on board for, you know, predominantly the same reasons. All have different outlooks, different ways of dealing with things, you know, wealth of experience, you know, 25 years, a long time in industry, you know. So, you know, actually to be able to pick up the phone and speak to these, you know, experts, you know, and other business owners to lean on, you know, ask them, you know, a question and pick their brains and, you know, find out how they would maybe handle something is invaluable. But to pick up the phone, you know, it kind of helps that you like most of them as well, all of them,
Exactly.
you know. But actually be able to go out and have a beer with them and come to events and, you know, all be, you know, you gel, you feel part of a team. It's hard to explain, it really is, because you are self-employed, and if you, like I say, you're on your own and you're out there doing, you said isolated. I never quite feel isolated because of, you know, the setup at TAUK is WhatsApp groups left, right and centre. You know, I hear from, you know, probably more of us guys a day than I did speak to people in my branch at times off, you know, so you're not really isolated. I'm okay with being on my own, but I know that actually if I want to pick up the phone and speak to someone, you know, they're there to talk to, and you're meeting up quite often and, you know, it's great social events and it's not a chore. It used to be quite a chore back in the day for me, but it's not a chore here. It's enjoyable. And yeah, you know, it's so invaluable. Like it's, you know, a key part of me joining and a key part of me wanting to stay.
I think you pick up new ideas from people as well. You know, when you're doing it on your own, for example, completely on your own without being part of a brokerage, for example, you've got your own ideas, etc. But sometimes it's quite good to have fresh ideas and things that you think, oh, wow, that's great. How are you doing that? Or marketing. You know, I might not be the best person at marketing, for example, but one of my peers is really doing really well on social media, etc. How are you doing that? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And what I found amazing is everyone shares the same ethos and everyone is happy to share ideas. Yeah. And you almost get, it's almost a pat on the back when somebody does sort of ask you for ideas and they start using it.
I think you know, you're the industry, you know, certainly from when I first started, which was like, you know, early 2000s, you know, it's very much dog eat dog, you know, us against the world, you know, or us against the world. It was me against you. You know, you'd be sitting next to me and it's like, you know, we'd be enemies because you kind of bred that way. And I would never ask you for, you know, what are you doing? You know, I would never want to release any kind of golden nuggets that has worked well for me to you because I wouldn't want to, you know, give you a leg up. But it's just so different.
It's definitely going more sort of collaboration rather than the rivalry like it used to be. And I really like the way that that's all working. I do see in time, you know, for example, when you look at America, you have your realtors that go out, don't they? And they host an open day on one of their properties and they invite all the local agents to come and stuff. I just don't understand why we don't do that in the UK. Why are we still working like we did 20 years ago? You know, and I love that collaboration that we all have.
I imagine it's very motivational because I imagine you look within the WhatsApp group and the conversation you have and you're like, oh, they just list the house at £1 million. Why am I not listing the house? Well, they're now charging 2%. Why am I charging 1.5%? Sort of, sort of if they can do it, I can do it as well sort of thing. So I imagine that's got that element to it as well. Yeah.
I think coming back to your question as well about isolation, for me personally, my whole lifestyle changed when I become part of particularly the agency UK. So I tend to get out of isolation by going to networking groups and things like that, building bonds with other local businesses, which you wouldn't do as an employed estate agent. So I never feel alone.
And do you think anyone actually ever reaches that perfect work-life balance, or do you think it's like an ever-evolving thing that you are working on?
I don't think it's ever. Yeah, it's never. From my perspective, it will never be perfect. It'll be better, and it is better than it was. And then there'll be parts when it probably gets worse again. But
I think it's having discipline within yourself, because it's very easy to sort of say, oh yeah, I'll do that, because you don't want to say no. But actually, sometimes you've got to take a step back and go, actually, I need to manage my diary a bit better. And I think it's just down to diary management, because that viewing or that's still going to be there, whether you move it on to that day or, it's actually being disciplined in
Do you
yourself.
think it comes down to your priorities in the business? Is the priority in the business that extra viewing at 7:00 at night, for example, or is it me going for dinner with my wife, for example, or me seeing the kids? And it comes down to that priority mindset, saying actually, what is Tom Mason mentioned earlier, Celeste, my priority when I started the business was spend time with my family and it was to get paid more, sort of thing. So, in that order, spend more time with my family and then to get paid more. So I think people kind of cut themselves out of the equation there and go, actually, I'll just do that extra viewing.
I think it's setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And making sure your close family know what your boundaries are. My wife, my kids know that if my phone rings, I do need to answer it, really. But I will get back to whatever they're doing. But likewise, if we're going out for a meal and it's no phones, it's no phones.
But yeah, I think that was a good point. Pick a wise, pick a good partner. Your partner, I couldn't have done what I've done without my partner. So we talk about, the Agency UK and everyone around it and everything, et cetera. But I would definitely not build a business without my wife and the support that she gives and shows me, because, I'm able to do all of those 7:00 viewings, 8:00 viewings, 7 a.m, viewing, Christmas Day viewing, all of those things, because the bigger picture is building something so that actually a little bit further down the line, you don't have to do all of that.
I think that's a really important point as well. Having your family behind you is crucial. Quite often when I'm looking to bring people into my team or bring people into coming self-employed and we're having those initial chats, I will say, bring your partner in, get your partner involved so they know the ins and outs of what it's all about before they start. I think it's really crucial.
I love those points. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.